So we're in Daf Pei, and we're up to Rabbi Eliezer, which is approximately 12 lines down from the top. So the Mishnah records the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer regarding what's called a Sris Chama, who is someone who is a saris, he's infertile, and it's through some sort of natural phenomenon. It didn't happen b'dei Adam. And choletz v'choltzin li'ishto. So he's in the parasha of chalitza, and the reasoning for that is because mipnei sheyesh lo refuah. He has a refuah. In other words, he's not in a permanent, irreversible state. Uraminu. And the Gemara says that we find Rabbi Eliezer contradicts himself and maintains elsewhere in a Mishnah in Masechet Nida that Sris Chama Eino Choletz. Ben Esrim Shana V'lo Hevi Shtei Saros. A man reaches the age of 20 and he still has not produced Shtei Saros, which is Simone Gadlus. And this is true for both a Zohar and a Nekeva. When a Nekeva brings Shtei Saros and she's 12 years old, she becomes a Gdola, and a Zohar who has Shtei Saros becomes 13 years old, he's a Godol. And they are called B'nai Das and the Chaim V'mitzvahs. But those who did not bring Saros, we don't consider them Gedolim until they reach the age of 20. At that point, we assume that they are, in the case of a male, a saris, in the case of a female, an islandess. But up until the age of 20, they're considered as Ketanim, because they don't have Simonim that make them into Gedolim. Now, this person who is 20 years old, he doesn't have Shtei Saros, and a Yevamot falls to him for Yibum. In other words, his older brother died without children, and his wife falls to him for Yibum. And the halacha is that Bezdin are machayev the Yevama to either be misyabemes or to get chalitza. And in order to pater her from Yibum of chalitza and allow her to marry someone else, yaviu raya shehu ben esrim. In other words, the Yevama and her representatives, her relatives, will have to prove that this man, the Yavam, is 20 years old. As if to say that if he's 20 years old and he doesn't have Shtei Saros, then he has the status of a saris, what we call a Sris Chama. And in contradiction to Rabbi Eliezer's position in our Mishnah that she requires chalitza, she would not require chalitza. She could marry anyone without chalitza. Vehu hasaris, and he is the saris. Shelo choletz v'lo miyavim. And the same is true for a female, bas esrim, v'lo hevia shtei saros, so she doesn't have simoni gadlus. Her husband dies without children, she falls for Yibum. Bezdin are going to require that she receive Yibum or Chalitza unless she can prove that Yaviu Raya Shibas Esrin. Behi islandess, then she is the islandess about which there is no Yibum nor Chalitza, Shalo Chaletzis Velomis Yabemis. Divrei Beis Hillel. So Beis Hillel puts the critical age at 20. Now we get to the Shita Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai Omrim Zevazeh, whether it's a male or a female, B'nei Shmona Esrei. It all depends on the age of 18. If by the age of 18 they don't bring tsaros, then there's no Chalitza Lo Yibum, because these are established as a saris in the case of a male and an islandess in the case of a female. Rabbi Eliezer Omer has zocher kedivrei Beis Hillel, unekeva kedivrei Beit Shammai. We can establish a female as an islandess already at the age of 18, if she doesn't have saros, and therefore she doesn't need chalitza or yibum, and that's like Beit Shammai. But whereas in the case of a zachar, we wait till he is 20 years old. At the age of 20, if he doesn't have shtei saros, then we establish him as a saris, and he does not need, he's not a choletz, and the Yevamot does not need chalitza, as long as he can prove that he is 20 years old. And Rabbi Eliezer explains why this distinction between the age for a male, the age for a female. Sheha isha mimaheres lavo lifnei ha'ish. We know that a woman matures earlier than a man. So therefore, if she does not bring tzaras and she's already 18 years old, she's like a zachar who would mature, in this case, 2 years later, and he reached the age of 20 and he doesn't have tzaras. But in both cases, whether it's a female at the age of 18 or a male at the age of 20, lo choletzes v'lo mityabemes. And that's against Rabbi Eliezer's shita as recorded in our Mishnah, that Sris Chama, here in this Brisa, Eino Choletz. And we're talking about a person who's born from Leda as a Saris, not Saris B'dei Adam, but in any event, in our Mishnah, a Sris Chama who's born a Saris is Choletz. He needs to give Chalitza, will force him to give Chalitza. Here in the Brisa, Rabbi Eliezer is recorded saying that he's Eino Choletz, lo choletzes v'lo mityabemes. Omar Rami bar Diklu, Dikule Omar Shmuel, Chazer bo Rabbi Eliezer. And in one of these two cases, whether it's the actually I mentioned the Brisa, but it's really a Mishnah Nida, or our Mishnah in Yevamos, in one case, Rabbi Eliezer rescinded his original view. Iboilahu mai haderbe, which one of the two Mishnayos was his original view that he rejected, and which was his final view? So the Gemara is now going to prove from our Mishnah that our Mishnah was his final opinion. Toshma desanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer Sris Chama Choletz v'choltzin liishto. So we have a brisa which presumably would present the shita of Rabbi Eliezer b'sofo shel davar, that you require chalitza in the case of a Sris Chama shekein b'minon misrapim, because we find that there's a place to send these people for a refuah. And where is that? Balachsandria shel Mitzrayim. That's where they had the experts. They knew how to handle these situations of what appears to be an irrevocable situation of a srisus, and they had a refuah for it. Since we see in the Brisa that Rabbi Eliezer reflects his shita as reflected in our Mishnah, as expressed in our Mishnah, then it's more likely to assume that this is his main view, his last view on the subject. Now the Gemara offers an alternative reconciliation of the stira in Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Lazar Amar, again, this is an Amora, Li Olam Rabbi Eliezer lo hadarbe. No, there was no, he did not remove and reject his original position. But with regard to the Mishnah Nida, in which Rabbi Eliezer says that when she reaches the age of 18, she's an islandess, and he reaches the age of 20, he's a saris. That was not a statement as far as Ptur, Yibum, V'chalitza, but rather Linyan Onshim. At what age do we establish that a person is a saris, a male, or a woman an islandess, and they have the status of Gedolim, such that now they can be punished like a bardas? And before the age of 18, in the case of an akeva, or 20 in the age of a male, they are still considered ketanim because they didn't bring saros. And it's only when they get shanim, that's when they become bar onshin, they become gdolim. But as far as Yibum and Chalit is concerned, Rabbi Eliezer maintained as a consistent shita that a Srischama requires to be choletz or his Yevama to be choletzis. Now, as we go on, we point out here that a saris and an islandess that don't bring sorrows, as we saw in our Mishnah, the Mishnah Nida, and the sugya that we learned, and therefore their gadlus depends upon shanim, 20 according to Beis Hillel, 18 according to Beis Shammai, and Rabbi Eliezer, 20 in a zachar, 18 in a keva. And here we're going to introduce in this context a machlokas shin Rav and Shmuel about the concept of limafreya. Does limafreya apply in a case of gadlus of shanim, when there are no shtei saros? Ochel chelev. A person is chayiv malchus for eating chelev. If they got hasra, there were two witnesses. And now we're going to start with an akeva. Miben 12 v'yom echad ad 18. From the age of 12 till 18, and this reflects the Shita Beit Shammai, or Rabbi Eliezer for that matter, V'noldu bo simone saris. So now we assume at the age of 18 that we have here an islandess in the case of a female, saris at the age of 20 in the case of a male. But now what happened is li'achar mikan hevi shtei saris. Now he has shtei saris. So he was lacking what we call simonim, and therefore he was established as a saris. And therefore, his age before 20 or before 18 is that of a katan, but now he exhibits simonim. And Rav is going to apply the principle of lemafreya, because now we realize and we understand that this person is not a saris. Is therefore Rav Omer nasa saris lemafreya. So we go back to the age of 12. And we establish now that at the age of 12, she was already a gedola. And since she ate chelev during this period of time, before she exhibited shtei saros, she gets malchus for eating chelev, because now that she exhibits simonim, she becomes a gedola mafreya from the age of 12. So any chelev that she ate between the age of 12 and 20 generates a chiyuv malchus. Ushmuel Amar Katan Haya V'osa Shah. So there's a machlokas now. What is the essence of simonim, of shtei saros? Is it A or B? Do we say like Shmuel that the saros create gadlus, or do we say like Rav that the simonim, the shtei saros, is a gilui, and it reveals the nature of the person, namely that the person is not a saros, but rather a gadol? So Rav holds that we don't need the simonim, the shtei saros, to generate gadlus. We need the shtei saros to determine that this person is not a saros, and therefore, in a female at the age of 12, she became a gedola, and in a male at the age of 13. Shmuel, on the other hand, says you can't become a gedola limafreya, but from the moment that she has shtei saros, from that moment and on, she becomes a gedola. So any chelev that she ate prior to the shtei saros is parter because she was a kana. Now, in order to introduce the objection of Rav Yosef raised against Rav, we'll say the following. We have a sugya in the third parak of Ksubis, which is called a lunaris, about ones and mafata. And the case is a naira besula. Now, the Torah says that in the case of ones and mafata, in a Nara, she's between the age of 12 and 12 and a half, the Ma'anes has to pay 50 kesef, chamishim kesef. And now we have machlokes recorded at the beginning of Perek Elunaris on Daf Chavtes and Ksubis between Rabbi Meir and Chacham. What's the deal of a ketana? Rabbi Meir holds that there's only a chiyuv of ma'anes, of ones u'mefate, chamishim kesef, when she's a nara, during that period of 6 months. Because she has to leave the state of katnus, she cannot enter into bagrus, and that middle of the road stage is those 6 months between age 12 and age 12 and a half. The Chacham reject this, and they hold that when the Torah in the parsha of Onis Umafata mentions Nara, the Torah is saying Nara v'lo bogeres, but it means even a Nara, and how much more so a Ketana. Maskif lo Rav Yosef le Rav, according to Rav, who holds that an islandess can become a Gdola l'mafreya when she exhibits simonim, and therefore she became a Gdola at the age of 12, and now she exhibits simoni islandess. Is la Rabbi Meir yesh lo yehe knas? Wait a second. If you're going l'mafreya, then she should be able to collect a knas, because now we know that in fact she was a nara, a gedola, at the age of 12. So if a man was ma'anes or mafatan islanders, he should be chayiv knas, because according to Rav, once we establish her as an islandess, when she reaches the age of 18 and she doesn't have saras, then we go with a birur l'mafreya that she was a gedola at the age of 12. So when he was ma'anes her at the age of 12, he was ma'anes a nara, because she becomes a gedola according to Rav l'mafreya after she is established to be an islandess. So she gets that period of 6 months between Narus 12 and Bagus 12 and a half. And during that time period, if somebody was ma'anis or mafata her, he should be chayiv the knas of chamishim kesef. And in the brisa that's quoted in Ksubit on Daf Lamed Hey, the brisa establishes that an islandess does not get knas, and that's a reflection of the shita of Rabbi Meir. Amalei Abaye, mikatnusa yotza lebeger. The case of an islandess is a case of a woman who does not have naris. She goes directly from katnus into bagus. And even though Rav holds lemafreya, she becomes a Gdola l'mafreya, she becomes a Gdola from the age of 12, and she leaves the status of a Ketana. She does not enter into that middle stage of Naros, which is a 6-month period of time between Katnus and Simoni Bagus, which is Shtei Saras. The islandess doesn't have Simoni Bagus, so she never has Naros. And she doesn't have naris, there's no onus umafata. Omer Rav Yosef turns to Abaye, and he says, you're correct. And he praises him. He says, Kol ki hani mili mal yosa yisamu mishmai. I wish that all these great statements and halachic insights would be said in my name. And as I asked you the kasha, and I didn't come up with the answer, you came up with the breakthrough answer. And now I'm going to prove that your answer is correct. The Sanya, ein hasoris nidon keben sore umora. A soris cannot be considered a ben sore umora. A saris who does not have the sorrows of gadlus, he doesn't have what's called milui zakon hatachton, those pubic hairs. He is excluded from the din of ben sorer umora. The ein islandess, the dones, kinara hamurasa. And an islandess who had an intimate relationship with a man during her Erison period, during the 6-month period, after she becomes a Gdola, Nidones Kinara Murasa. She has the din of a Nara Murasa who gets Misa Beskila. And Ein Islandess Nidones Kinara Murasa. She will not be punished with the punishment of Skila because she's an islandess. And therefore, instead, she gets Misas Chenek. And what's the reasoning for this? And the Brisa says, She mikatnusa yotzasola beger. She doesn't have naras. A nara murasa shizin, so the Torah says, gets skila. And in this case, she's not a nara, because since she's an islandess, she goes directly from katnus into bagrus, with skipping over the period of time which is called naras. And this Brisa, says Rav Yosef, establishes that Abaye's breakthrough shita is absolutely correct. Rabbi Avo Simone Saris. The island is Uben Shmona, and the case of a fetus that's born after 8 months. The Hevi Simonim Shenigmar Gidulo. He has simonim that indicate that he has completely matured and developed. He has seyar, he has siparnaim, they're fully developed. Is nevertheless ein osin bahen masad sheyu ben esrim. We're not going to be kovea with absolute certainty that if they don't, in the first 2 cases now of Simone Soros v'Islandess, if they didn't have saros, they didn't exhibit the simonim of saros, we're not going to be absolutely certain that they are a saris or an islandess, and they're gedolim, achiyu ben esrim, until they reach the age of 20, which reflects the shita of Beis Hillel. So that means if the male or the female did not exhibit saros, then we're going to be kover that gadlus at the age of 20, he is a saros, she is an islandess. And if a ben shmona remains alive until that age, then for sure he is a ben kayom. And this is called lahotzi mitoras nefel, achziko beben kayom. And the Rishonim reject this interpretation that we presented. It was Rashi's interpretation. Ben Yutes. He's 19.9 years old. And he's walking on the streets. Nefel, and you think he's a Nefel until he reaches the age of 20? And therefore, they interpret this Gemara differently, that here we're talking about the din of Ben Shmona in a case where he has a chisaron of saros. And the halacha is that sometimes when a young person, not in this particular case, but in general, a young child has simonim, we consider them shuma. It's just like hairs on the body, but it's not really simonim until he arrives at the age of gadlus. So too in a child, a fetus who's born after 8 months of pregnancy, until the age of 20, we assume that those saras are shuma. Now the Gemara asks the following kasha on Rabbi Avo. Uben shmona mikachai. You're assuming that a fetus after 8 months is born and could survive and could become a yotza michlal nefel. But Sanya, we have a brisa that ben shmona hareu ke'evan v'osel utaltalo. We have a din of muktzah with regard to a corpse. And the brisa establishes that the status of a ben shmona is that of a corpse. And therefore, also the taltal of Shabbos, he has the din of muktzah. Aval imo shocha olav umini kaso, and the mother, because of this situation of the great danger, is allowed to nurse the baby. She leans over the baby and nurses the baby. And that's because the sakana of the mother and the tinok. And even though in the process of nursing the baby, she may move the baby inadvertently, tiltul, which would be a violation of tiltul muktzah. And we see clearly that a ben shmona is not going to live at all. And therefore, his status is that of a corpse, of a mess, and it's muktzah.